Let's go make some law now. Yeah, 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 some law. Hey, you lawyer guys, you don't know.
As what used to be the summer movie season begins, theaters are tentatively reopening in some places, and drive-ins are making a comeback. But with most theaters still closed due to the coronavirus pandemic, and many people exercising caution in returning to public spaces, plenty of us are watching the buzziest summer movies at home instead. Film releases have not slowed down just because people aren't leaving their homes to see them. Each weekend on streaming services and through virtual theatrical releases, new and newly available movies arrive to delight cinephiles of all stripes. This movie's weekend span a broad range of genres and topics. There are two new releases from two beloved directors, Spike Lee and Judd Apatow, both of which explore masculinity and the effects of trauma, albeit in very different ways. There's a quiet drama about ethical choices around pregnancy and surrogacy. One documentary explores the Black Panthers, while another looks at a recent police shooting that rocked several communities in New York City. One of 2019's most beloved comedic mysteries and a cult favorite documentary from 1970 are also newly available to stream. Most of the films that were newly released in recent weeks are also still available to watch. Here are the 7 best movies that premiered this week and are available to watch at home for a few bucks on digital services, through virtual theatrical engagements, or to subscribers on streaming platforms. The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution. There's been more than a few movies about the Black Panthers, some of which are recognized classics, such as Agnes Varda's half-hour 1970 documentary. But the 2015 documentary Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution, directed by the venerable Stanley Nelson Jr., is the first full-length feature about the revolutionary organization. Nelson uses interviews with dozens of people who were Panthers alongside archival footage, much of which had never been publicly broadcast before the film. Nelson and his producers tried to use FOIA to access wiretaps of the group, but never managed to get access. The result is an introduction to the Panthers and an argument for their importance, both in the past and in the present. Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution had been streaming on PBS.org through July 4th, but it's also streaming for Amazon Prime subscribers, available to digitally rent or purchase on iTunes and Amazon, Google Play, and Vudu. Original cast album, Company. In 1970, the legendary documentarian D.A. Pennebaker showed up at the Marathon live album recording session for Company, Stephen Sondheim's new musical. The result is Original Cast Album Company, a behind-the-scenes look at the album's now famous production, which has been extremely difficult to see outside of occasional film repertory house runs for years. Pennebaker's scrolling text at the beginning notes that it was supposed to be the pilot for a TV show of original cast recordings that got scrapped after all the producers moved to Los Angeles. Instead of that show, though, we got the beloved cult film, which manages to pack into an hour the joys and pains of collaboration and striving for perfection, punctuated by moments of hilarity and, especially, the iconic scene in which Elaine Stritch nearly loses her mind trying to record Ladies Who Lunch. For decades, D.A. Pennebaker's documentary has been nearly unknown except to true theater zealots, surfacing only as rare YouTube clips and the occasional esoteric reference. The most famous of these is the 2019 Documentary Now episode, Original Cast Album Co-op, which suddenly popularized the documentary no one had seen and exploded calls for its wilder distribution. It's now finally being released in digital form for the first time ever through Criterion, and it's marvelous. Original Cast Album Company is streaming now on the Criterion Channel. Da 5 Bloods. Spike Lee's Da 5 Bloods stars Norm Lewis, Clark Peters, Isaiah Whitlock Jr., and a magnificent Delroy Lindo in a story about 4 black Vietnam vets who returned to the country decades after their tours of duty in search of gold and their fallen buddies' remains. Da 5 Bloods takes on a myriad of issues, starting with the Vietnam veterans, a sharply disproportionate number of whom are black, and who were left to live with the remnants of a pointless war long past when the rest of us had moved on. Spike Lee weaves that strand of history into the broader canvas of the 60s and 70s, from the civil rights movement to the moon landing. And then he extends it into today, all the way to the Black Lives Matter movement. Lindo gives a staggering performance as Paul, whose traumas have turned him into a MAGA hat sporting spout of paranoia, to the discomfort of both his friends and his son, David, played by Jonathan Majors, a Morehouse alum who comes looking for his father after he returns to Vietnam. That narrative choice alone means that Da 5 Bloods, while political to the bone, refuses to be stuffed into partisan pigeonholes. What it means to be black in America does not. Da 5 Bloods is streaming now on Netflix. Knives Out. One of last year's most purely entertaining films, Knives Out, uses the familiar Agatha Christie-style whodunit template to tell a twisty murder tale with a bite. Knives Out concerns the death of Harlan Thrombey, played by Christopher Plummer, a massively successful, wealthy mystery writer, and the patriarch to a family in which nearly everyone seems to have had some reason to want him dead, even if it's just to get their inheritance. One detective, played by Lakeith Stanfield, is leading the investigation, but another, played by Daniel Craig, is lurking around in no official capacity, and nobody, not even he, really, knows why. Meanwhile, a young woman named Marta, played by Ana de Armas, who cared for Harlan, may know more than she wishes. Now, Agatha Christie's stories often hinge on classic distinctions and play on English fears of foreigners. Knives Out, set in patrician Massachusetts, takes aim at xenophobia, anti-immigrant sentiment, and the clueless privilege of the very rich in a way that's clearly intended to echo contemporary rhetoric. It's a romping, wicked delight, and it's streaming now on Amazon Prime. The King of Staten Island. Pete Davidson co-wrote and stars in Judd Apatow's The King of Staten Island, about a young man who's worked his way into a dead-end life. Davidson plays Scott, who lives with his mother Margie, played by Marissa Tomei, and his younger sister Claire, played by Maud Apatow. And while Claire is heading to college, Scott is a textbook case of failure to launch. Scott and Claire's father was a firefighter who died in a hotel fire when they were children. And as a fact in real life, Davidson's father, who was named Scott, was a firefighter who died as a first responder in the 9/11 attacks. But things change when Margie begins dating a firefighter named Ray, played by Bill Burr. Steve Buscemi, Belle Powley, and Pamela Adlon also star in a sneakily mature movie about growing despite trauma and loving people, even when they're imperfect. You can watch The King of Staten Island on digital and on-demand platforms such as Apple TV and Amazon. The Surrogate. The Surrogate, the debut feature from Jeremy Hirsch, has a premise that sounds almost like a thought experiment. Jess, played by Jasmine Batchelor, has offered to be a surrogate and egg donor for her two best friends, Josh, played by Chris Perfetti, and Aaron, played by Sullivan Jones. They're exalted when the pregnancy test is positive, but a medical consultation reveals that the fetus likely has Down syndrome. Immediately, the situation becomes much more complicated given the array of options they must suddenly choose from. Will they terminate the pregnancy? Carry the child to term? Who will be responsible? Who would be involved in the child's life? And whose choice is it to make? Without preaching solutions or offering answers, The Surrogate's gentle empathy lets us feel the dilemmas each of the characters experience. It recognizes that the sheer array of choices available to us today is part of what makes the situation so difficult. The Surrogate is available in virtual theatrical release at theaters around the country. You can see the film's website for more details. And that is all for this video. You know the drill. Hit like and subscribe to Patrol Clip, and until next time.